Are there too many lobbyists in DC? Well, the answer is obviously yes. But are there too many crypto lobbyists in DC? And the answer is who knows? That is the topic of discussion for today's Writer's Room here on Bitcoin Season 2. Colin and I review the latest CoinDesk piece describing the state of Bitcoin and crypto lobbying in our nation's capital. We go through the numbers, the names, and the who, what's, and whens, and where do we go from here? Bitcoin Season 2 is brought to you by Arch Network, the platform building bridgeless apps on Bitcoin. More on Arch later on the show. Let's kick it off. Welcome back to Bitcoin Season 2. This is Charlie and Colin, and we are talking Bitcoin crypto lobbying today. We may actually say the word blockchain today.
We might say the word blockchain. We might say the word digital asset. These crypto companies are slowly morphing into lizard people. They are conforming to the natural forms of those in the swamp, and they want a seat at the table. And Charlie had a really good observation about the kind of lobbying efforts that we're seeing now versus what we've seen in the past 16 years as we have a more friendly administration and a more friendly congressional and regulatory environment.
Yeah, what I'm seeing, I just mentioned this before we hit go, but really you can think of it, listener, like this. The past 16 years of Bitcoin and crypto has been us on the defensive. And now what we're seeing is the industry shifting to offensive. We saw crypto broadly raise the most money of any other single issue group in the last election cycle. And we saw that it worked. You saw seats flip all across the country. You saw the first pro-crypto candidate in the White House. And now you see that we've realized that the money actually works. I mean, the funny thing is, we've known that the money worked. It's funny because of all the critics of the state of the state of the state and the state of money in politics, crypto is the most critical of that and the most aware. But it's maybe we didn't take it to heart and realize that we too can influence legislation in our nation. But before I get started, Colin, you want to take a look at this cool cup I got here? Take a look at for the listeners. You're missing out. I am drinking out of an exclusive Strategy, formerly MicroStrategy, solo cup. So I will be flexing this on all future writers' rooms going forward.
He is flooding his body with elixirs and BPAs from the Strategy Orange Solo Cup. That was, as Charlie said, exclusive to OpNext. And if you were feeling bad about going to OpNext, don't feel that bad. I helped organize the thing, and I also couldn't make it. But I heard very good things. It's very fun to go on social media and to see all of my colleagues get tagged in all of these fun photos while I was at home holding the fort down. But no sour grapes here. Just a little bit of FOMO.
No, I mean, speaking of having to watch all the fun from afar, you and I, Colin, don't live in our nation's capital, DC, and we get to watch as all of the crypto lobbyists bumble against each other and vie for who gets to sit the closest to some secondary person in Trump's outer circle at some cocktail hour. So
who gets to kiss the ring the hardest? Before we jump into the CoinDesk article that will inform kind of the kernel of today's discussion, I want to share a graph that Charlie just referenced in terms of total fundraising spend by crypto companies. We'll return to this figure later on in the pod, but this shows total campaign contributions to super PACs during different election cycles. And as you can see in 2024, crypto corporations spent a staggering $119 million collectively as a corporation, or collectively as an industry. The bulk of this came from Coinbase and Ripple. Coinbase spent about 50 million. I think Ripple was about 49 million. But you can still see that this pales in comparison to the 2020 or 2022 cycles, where they only spent collectively between those two cycles just under $10 million. And the reason why we're bringing this up now, before we get into the meat of the article that we'll be referencing, is, to me, it stands to reason that following the largest surge in campaign contributions from crypto companies, we would also see an increase in lobbying efforts on Capitol Hill. And that's exactly what we're seeing. And I think to Charlie's point, what this really indicates is that now these crypto companies feel like they actually have a voice, whereas before they were completely shut out and had to go survival mode. And there were only a handful of companies, some of them really think tanks rather than lobbyists, pure lobbyists, that were trying to produce research or go on the defensive whenever there was any sort of, kind of disastrous bill. Like the one that comes to mind is the one that Senator Warren was pushing, I think, a few years ago, that would have basically mandated anyone running a node or decentralized software to get a money transmitter license. There were implications for miners and node operators, decentralized companies, decentralized exchanges.
Self-hosted wallet narrative. There was this whole thing like you couldn't even. There was this. It was like a 60-day whirlwind. Like, are we even going to be able to self-custody legally any crypto asset? And that didn't materialize. So like that has been the story. Is just been threat shows up somehow. Various heroes, often unspoken, deflect that, and now it's like we're kind of surprised because it seems like we as an industry do have an opportunity to lay the groundwork. You see this where like you've got pretty much everybody who's been newly appointed in this administration and the decision makers at every level are like, yeah, we want to provide clear guidelines for the crypto industry. We think that it's good, and we think it's an emerging sector that needs guidelines for how to grow. And we're like, whoa,
right. So, and I think there are two, at least from where I'm sitting, there are kind of two primary reads here. One is more charitable, the other is uncharitable. The more charitable one is these crypto companies or these lobbyists who represent crypto companies are looking at a 4-year window where they're going to try to cram in as much as possible in terms of positive regulation or push for positive legislation that will give crypto, if not a leg up, at least a fair shake in terms of how it is treated, right, by the powers that be. Because I completely biased opinion here. I'm not going to pretend like I am some sort of objective journalist who has my arm's length from these things. I think that generally speaking, Bitcoin mining, the cryptocurrency in general, has been one of the most maligned industries.
You don't have to pull punches, Colin. We've covered it. I mean,
we've covered choke point 2.0. Yeah. We've covered a lot of the FUD around Bitcoin mining. I mean, it's just been a constant barrage of negativity and misrepresentations and misinformation of how things actually operate in the industry. Meanwhile, while potentially disastrous or actually disastrous actors like Sam Bankman-Fried somehow get like a pass from a lot of these regulators and politicians who are, ostensibly supposed to be protecting retail investors. But we'll cover that later. All of that being said, to wrap up this kind of rambling point, is that, a lot of these lobbyists are probably looking at this and say, we have 4 years to try to make our case for why our industry should at the least not be killed and at best have legislation and regulation that will help it thrive. That's the charitable read. The uncharitable read is that each of these lobbyists will be representing their respective industries or companies that back them, and they're going to try to build moats, regulatory moats around those companies to entrench their positions in the market. This is regulatory capture. It happens with literally everything. And this is where the dark side of lobbying kind of comes out, right? I was having a conversation with my wife about this a while back, where, we always talk about it would be great if we could get money out of politics. I think most people would agree with that. And I generally agree in terms of campaign contributions and other things that you can buy access and buy influence that maybe isn't the best thing. At the same time, I come from an industry or work in an industry that has seen multiple attempts to try to crush it. And so it's hard for me to say that lobbying doesn't have a place, because without lobbyists and without people actually going to the politicians and voicing these concerns and trying to educate, you would have completely ignorant people regulating industries they have no clue about. So there's a balance.
And I may jump in and give a little color on what this looks like at the local and regional level. I myself have been active in my home state of Oklahoma. For the international listener or even the uninformed American listener, that's the state above Texas. And
Oklahoma, where the wind comes sweeping across the plain.
Yep, that's the waving wheat. I've got my first little taste of this over the past couple of years, and I imagine that what it looks like on a smaller state level, it probably looks about the same with bigger people and more money at the national level. So let's go to the CoinDesk article, Colin.
After that meandering introduction.
Yeah, which basically states what you and I have already prefaced here. Crypto's moment has seemingly arrived in Washington, D.C., but as new organizations hatch and leadership shifts at the top advocacy organizations, the field of pro-crypto groups is trying to carry the torch is more crowded than ever. No fewer than a dozen groups, including the Digital Chamber, Blockchain Association, and Crypto Council for Innovation, are seeking to steer digital asset policies in the U.S., some of them substantially overlapping in their membership bases, funding sources, and in the goals they're seeking to accomplish. That is a pretty good summary. Like, this only really covers the national organizations, of which there's now a dozen. And you, listener, may like me and Colin, you might get semantic satiation here. That's where you hear a word over and over and it ceases to lose its meaning. While technically these groups, which all have blockchain, crypto, council, institution, they're not all the same, but the words can get really confusing. I think you called it, Colin, the alphabet soup of lobbyist organizations. And that is what it feels like. So I think we can go through like what some of the high level, like some of the notable ones are. And forgive us if we mischaracterize like what the most prominent ones are, because, Colin and I don't spend our time in Washington. So we're not, we don't know where the soft power is located. But one of the oldest ones, and I'll pull this up for us, Colin, is the Digital Chamber. And this is the Digital Chamber. They've been around since 2014, and they're like blockchain agnostic. Many people may recognize the name Perianne Boring. She started many years ago, and now it's run by CEO Cody Carbone, former Ernst & Young guy. But, look at the folks on this. It's a bunch of people who I don't know at all or don't know the names of, who all look like they probably spent some time in the lobbyist trenches and worked their way up to one of the Digital Chamber pro tech lobbyist companies. And that is a pretty common story, I think, for a lot of these organizations. I will make a generalization that it is quite common in my experience, and I think for other people in the industry like me, to look at the lobbyists of these organizations and identify them as pretty clueless about how some of the basic things in blockchains work. They're not really that dialed into industry trends, and they tend to be very blockchain agnostic. So agnostic, in fact, that they can probably barely describe the differences between each one. And that makes it difficult for a Bitcoiner to look at this and say, how do these people even represent me at all?
Yeah. And this is an important thing to bring up, I think, in terms of, if you look at, you kind of have a similar problem in the media landscape where, not to throw shade on Blockspace, the Bitcoin industry publication, this actually helps with some of our coverage of mining, though, because you've mined before. Will and I both have worked at mining companies, as have you. All this to be said, in media, you kind of have this problem with industry coverage. Typically, the best people to cover the industry would be the ones who are actually working in the industry, but then they have a conflict of interest and they also need to run their businesses. So they're not going to go and become a journalist, right? And you kind of have the same problem with something like potentially policy wonks or, lobbyists, right? The people who would really be best to speak to the issues that the companies are facing with regards to regulation and legislation would be the ones running the companies, right? But they're too busy running their companies. So they're not going to take time off to do that, right? And maybe the best example of this, to tie it back into Bitcoin mining, and I'm kind of pulling this out of my ass a little bit, what I'm about to say. This is kind of like finger in the wind, but Bitcoin Mining Council, like it or hate it, it got some heat from some people. They didn't like the way they collected data. But the fact of the matter is the Bitcoin Mining Council, with Michael Saylor kind of as a ringleader figure in that, at least figurehead, was consisted of a bunch of Bitcoin mining companies that then pulled their data together and published quarterly and annual reports about their energy usage, about the penetration of renewables within their mix, and all of this other data that was helpful for contextualizing what miners actually do and dispelling some of the worries about their carbon footprint for people who care about that, right? All that being said, I think that especially on the state level, Bitcoin mining companies have kind of been forced into the spotlight because they are very infrastructure heavy and they are very out in the open. And they've honestly probably borne the brunt of the majority of negativity from the legacy media and from just the peanut gallery of people online talking about how much energy it uses. And so you'll see, for instance, like Senator Haggerty in my home state of Tennessee will like go to Bitcoin Park and talk to miners and talk about the opportunities for TVA and Bitcoin mining, right? And the only reason why that probably was ever furnished in the first place is because these Bitcoin miners eventually had to go to him and go to some of the politicians in Tennessee and say, this is what we're doing. Here's how we can actually help the grid, etc. And I feel like you've probably experienced this too in Oklahoma, where some of these Bitcoin miners are kind of forced by nature of their business to go themselves to some of these politicians and lobby on their own benefit rather than outsourcing it to a crypto lobbying company.
Yeah, it helps because a lot of the challenges communicating to non-technical, entirely unfamiliar legislators why your industry matters, and also communicate to them that you are a real industry. That's still kind of a challenge. And Bitcoin mining is the easiest to communicate because they can go to one of those sites.
Yeah,
it is impressive in its size and power. And you can look at real money that is flowing as an economic activity. You can look at people who are actually employed.
It's real nuts and bolts, right?
Yeah.
And you can look at people who are actually employed. You don't have to understand where the revenue is coming from Bitcoin mining. Like you don't need to understand how mining works.
And understand how it works. You could even like, I will say just one of the funny things, like the way we effectively in Oklahoma have communicated what Bitcoin mining is we reduce it to the point of it actually being a technically false statement. We say Bitcoin mining is validating transactions, and that's not really true.
The nodes are validating the transactions. Yeah. The miners are,
we're not, you can't say like we are generating valid.
Yeah, it's like, well, we're finding. So I heard that these miners are
doing nonce space to.
Yeah, exactly. Like I heard these miners are solving complex equations. Like actually, no, they're just finding a valid number below the difficulty target, and then they are mining the next block and attaching it to the former one in the chain. And it's like, what is? Does none of this make sense?
Block production scheme, which is what highly differentiated from proof of stake. They don't care about that. They're not going to, you can't explain that.
No, they care about knowing that the power companies and utilities are going to get paid.
Exactly.
And bonus points if you can show, like in Texas, how you can take on load when no one else wants to pay for it, and also dispatch that load when the grid needs it most.
And let me tell you, there's something to be said for a Bitcoin miner who can roll up in jeans and square-toed boots to like a city council meeting and go, "Yeah, I was out there plugging the machines in, and we kept the power on for the people in Dallas whenever the storm blew through." And they're like, "Oh, the people making the decisions love that stuff." And it's also true. So we parade those guys out, and
right.
I mean, I've been that guy, and so
I mean, you have to have those representatives. Hopefully he's got a fat lip in, and he's like, spitting or something in the city council meeting. But I think this is another segue into another important point of where it, Bitcoin mining is, love it or hate it, depending on who you are, with like it uses too much energy or doesn't use enough equation, right? Or spectrum, I should say. It is the most, literally the only physical part of this entire thing. And it is the easiest to contextualize for people who are outside of our industry because they can, like we said, they can actually see the industry. They can see what is going on. They can see that there's physical infrastructure behind it. Contrast that with news headlines of some kid making $10 million from a monkey JPEG, or, a bunch of people losing money in a DeFi hack. All of these things are totally ephemeral and scary because they really only are subjected to the negative headlines. And it's a lot harder to explain to people where the value is in a lot of, and literally everything else when it comes to crypto. With Bitcoin mining, they may not get why miners are buying all of that energy, but they know that they're buying it. Yeah. And that's kind of all that matters. And they can see the infrastructure and the CapEx spend behind it. But when it comes to literally everything else in crypto, which is just the realm of cyberspace, it doesn't really make as much sense to them. And I think this plays into, for the first time in this election cycle, crypto actually had a voice and mattered, whereas in every single other time, like Donald Trump was kind of the first candidate to say this is a huge voter block that has not gotten a fair shake. Whereas every other politician is like, crypto, why do I care what those people think?
Let me tell you about one of the most slept on opportunities in crypto. Arch is building fast, composable DeFi apps on Bitcoin. Arch apps tap into the OG blockchain with by far the most liquidity and best brand in crypto. I've known the team for over a year. The tech they're building is solid, and they are racing towards mainnet. There's dexes like Saturn, meme coins on funkybit.fun, instant loans on Cha-Ching, and so much more. Plus, they're rewarding testnet users, so join me in trying out Arch while it's still early. And so we have like a hydra now sprouting new heads, over a dozen of these nationally focused organizations. And I guess this is a good question that we can riff on. What do lobbyists do?
It's a great question.
Don't have a good answer, but it involves a lot of emails, a lot of going into legislators' offices, a lot of alcohol and cocktails at night, and a lot of phone calls. So, I'll say let's look at two ones that I'm pretty familiar with what they do on a daily and weekly basis: the Bitcoin Policy Institute and the Satoshi Action Fund. Now, the Satoshi Action Fund, led by the well-known in Bitcoin world Dennis Porter, says we're going to look at Bitcoin mining on a local and regional level and advocate for legislation at the state level for Bitcoin mining particularly. And so you'll see them focusing on what's happening at the state level, and they'll send reps to each state and they'll try to work to get policies. They'll promote their own policies. And that means that they're going and meeting with senators, local or local organizations, local businesses, local miners to try to advocate for these and develop plans by state. The Bitcoin Policy Institute is kind of more like a Bitcoin think tank. The Bitcoin Policy Institute is probably one of the, if you've read a report on why Bitcoin mining is not bad for the environment or why Bitcoin is valuable at all, written for the average person who is a voter, there's a good chance it came from the Bitcoin Policy Institute. So they hire a lot of professors and researchers, and they do a lot of public discourse, and they'll bring in fellows. And that's those are two different models for, at least of ones that I'm familiar with that I know are real lobbyist organizations.
Yeah, and I think that two important distinctions here: the state versus national level. To your point, Satoshi Action Fund very much focused on pushing through some of these state level Bitcoin mining bills. Right to mine was a huge one, right? I think they had a hand in.
They helped us do it in Oklahoma. It was a great one, foundational legislation.
Yeah, and on the national side, the Bitcoin Policy Institute, which is more of a think tank, they've produced pieces on how a strategic Bitcoin reserve would look like on the federal level, right? They were the first, as far as I could tell, some of the first Bitcoin native voices to talk about how President Trump could theoretically use the Exchange Stabilization Fund that was established under the Roosevelt administration, FDR, to basically act as a lever for the dollar's, strength against other currencies. The Exchange Stabilization Fund allows the federal government to buy and sell or act in the Forex markets on behalf of the dollar and things like that. And the other important distinction there is the kind of the think tank, right, angle. I mean, I'm sure Bitcoin Policy Institute does take meetings and maybe helps or is trying to push for legislation on the national front. But think tanks generally will produce research that is then used by other lobbyists or other industry actors to make their case to the regulators and politicians, right? They are kind of the soft hand of power in this instance for lobbying versus the hard hand where you're actually trying to push for legislation or lobby for certain, lobby for certain stipulations within bills and things like that. And on that note, in terms of your question about how this actually works, this would be a fantastic Bitcoin Season 2 episode, getting someone in here to talk about the nitty gritty, because my understanding of it is like very shallow and probably, based on things that you've seen from like West Wing or House of Cards, right? Where you just, the cocktail and fancy dinners, the cocktails and fancy dinners in dark corners of DC and things like that.
Yeah, a couple anecdotes on like what it looks like in Oklahoma. So I'm on the board of the Oklahoma Bitcoin Association, which is a 501c6, which is a not-for-profit, but it's not a non-profit. So it's not tax deductible. It's a merchants or business association equivalent. And you see 501c6s like ours in many states. And we're trying to be crypto agnostic, but very clearly pro-Bitcoin. In the types of legislation we promote. What does it look like? Well, first of all, you have to have someone to sponsor a bill. So you have to have a member of the House or Senate say, here's the bill and the draft of the bill. I like this. I'm going to put my name on it and I'm going to advocate it as it goes through this particular part of the legislature. And so then there can be meetings and committees before you get to a vote, and that bill has to get approved to get onto the floor. And a lot of that happens in going and spending a lot of face time with the important people whose votes matter. It means you have to put together informational material. It means you have to have messaging consistent. It means if your industry has a lot of infighting, you have to figure out how to get all those people aligned before that. If in a state you have like two of the biggest Bitcoin miners suing each other, and then now you're trying to get some like legislation passed, which is a specific miner neutral, that could be a barrier. So you got to get a lot of like clear, consistent messaging, because you've got sometimes 20 seconds, maybe 20 minutes if you're lucky, of FaceTime with these people. And so in our case, the Oklahoma Bitcoin Association, contracted, we did a lot of scouting, contracted a lobbyist firm, which is not related to crypto, but just very good at doing stuff in bipartisan work in the state capitol, and had them kind of walk us through how to do this. That takes money. Those people got to get paid. So we got to go get the money somewhere. Sometimes we do it. Sometimes we just pay them ourselves. So then like members from the Oakland Bitcoin Association will go with the lobbyists to meet various people. We'll line up things. We'll get all our constituents and local meetups to call these people when, the legislators when it's time to vote. So there's a lot of this stuff. And I imagine it looks really similar at the national stage, just way more people, way more money, way bigger conversations.
Yeah. I'm curious, and if you can answer this, like how do you butter up a politician to get them to even care? I mean, obviously this is the art of the whole lobbying, right? The whole lobbying endeavor, right, is finding the opportunities and weighing what's realistic and what isn't, right?
There's probably a bunch of different ways. I've gotten to see a little bit of this. You have to be very, very good at communicating what you do and being very affable as a personality. It benefits the somewhat sociopathic extroverts. because you are in the business of getting people to like you in a game which is not zero sum, but it's often zero sum. So in our case, like I prefer to go for the personal touch angle because I'm not the primary advocate or lobbyist. In my case, there's a few hundred state representatives in Oklahoma, and I personally know like 5 or 6 of them, like pretty well personally because I've grown up here for forever. One of them was a high school teacher, and he's one of the more prominent ones on the Democratic side. One of them's like somebody I went to church with. Another one had come to a couple of Bitcoin meetups by accident because we were having them at the bar they were at. So like those kind of things are really important. And then these people often, for issues which are not like broadly or highly controversial, they often don't get a lot of like direct input from their constituents. So I then, and me and the like other Bitcoin folks in the area, we ask our friends and people who come to the meetup to email their senator. And it's weird because it works. Now, when it comes to money, like there are some large Bitcoin miners in Oklahoma, some of the largest in the country, actually. And so we have to make sure that those people are behaving, making sure that they're operating legally, make sure that if we have policy, say a fiscal impact bill regarding tax breaks for infrastructure on mining, that they are aware and they're supportive of that type of language. Like, I feel like I'm just listing all the stuff, but like it's a ton of work. And that, all of that stuff are meetings and emails and inboxes and branding and event organization. And it's a huge business to communicate your interests to the decision makers on whichever Capitol Hill you call your own.
100%. And just to piggyback on what you just said, when charm and goodwill and, political ledger demand, I don't know if I pronounced that right, like political sleight of hand, doesn't work. Money can fill in the gap. Money talks. And this is a sheet. This is a table from Public Citizen, and it shows the campaign contributions per corporation and by super PAC for the 2024 election cycle. And you can see Coinbase, the top contributor. Ripple is a second by only what, like $1.5 million. But Coinbase contributed roughly $50.5 million to a number of PACs, the largest one being Fair Shake PAC, which took in a lot of money from cryptocurrency companies, among other tech industry companies. Ripple also donated $45 million to the Fair Shake PAC. And then down here we have Jump Crypto, Andreessen Horowitz, Jump with 15 million, Andreessen Horowitz 1.75 million donated. Payward Inc., I have no idea who that is, at 1 million. Circle Internet Financial of USDC, $1 million, and then Paradigm Operations LP at 1 million. And these are the ones that Public Citizen, is showing. I would venture to guess that there's actually more in here that Fair Shake took in, but maybe it was obfuscated. These are just corporate contributions. If you look at individual contributions, or maybe if the money was hidden through certain shell companies or something like that, you would probably find more money donated by cryptocurrency companies for 2024. But all this being said, with regards to trying to influence, right? One of the things that I've seen bubble up on X, and I should probably have read up on this more before I say what I'm about to say, but some people are starting to rumble that Circle with Coinbase is lobbying for USDC to get privileged status in the stablecoin realm versus USDT, right? So USDT by Tether is indisputably the largest stablecoin in circulation. I mean, last I checked, what was it? It was 800 billion in circulation?
But it makes sense. I mean, these are stablecoins are like the big business. We talked about it previously on this podcast on President Trump. What is it? President Trump salutes the dollar.
Yeah.
What was the name of the title? Whatever that episode was.
President Trump pledges allegiance to stablecoins.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm highly regarded for saying 800 billion. It's like 1.44 billion, which is still crazy for Tether. Yeah. But if you look at
this is big business, so like this is like one of the not maybe not zero sum, but it's low sum like competition here with stablecoins.
Yeah, and if you look at USDC's market cap, it's still pretty high. It is 60 billion, but that's not even half of what Tether's is. So there's this is you could almost argue that it's a winner take all game. It obviously isn't right now, but President Trump has been very clear that he sees stablecoins as a way to extend dollar dominance in abroad, right? I mean, stablecoins have been wildly popular in the global South and South America and in Africa for people who have very weak currencies. They use stablecoins to keep their purchasing power and to even buy goods and services, not just online, but also in meat space. So anyway, all that being said, this is kind of a tangent that we're seeing all this spend from Coinbase and a little bit from Circle. It'll be interesting, going back to what I said earlier, what regulatory moats are they going to try to carve out from this, right? I'm not one to like go and say like Coinbase is like the most evil company to ever grace crypto or Bitcoin, right? I'm not one of those Bitcoin maximalists, but I do think that there is an important, or how to say it's like there is a consideration that when you're one of the most powerful companies in the game, you're going to try to protect your interests, and they've put a lot of their backing behind Circle to try to be the dominant stablecoin, and to think they won't try to pull levers to secure that is maybe naive.
Yeah, I'll point out that if you remember, Coinbase was behind the Stand with Crypto initiative, and that was one of the few like rallying cries for our industry, for the plebs. I don't even know if I'll call it plebs, but just for retail. They set up a whole like pipeline for you to like, if you own crypto and you look into Coinbase, they will be like, they'll hand feed you like, here's what you should do. Here's who you call if you live in, New Mexico. And they rated all of the candidates and people as like, where they fall along the pro anti-crypto spectrum. And it's been huge. And then Coinbase has been the company leading the charge for like pro crypto legislation. And they've been pretty good at it so far. I don't want to be too apologetic because Coinbase did just have some very, very shady, for the 100th time, shenanigans yesterday with their like meme coin thing. I don't know if you saw that.
Yeah, the base thing. We covered it on the mining pod for the Cry Corner this week.
Oh man, yeah, the base meme coin rug. But like, when the alternative, when the other people giving just as much money are Ripple, then it's pretty clear who the less bad or the less the less shitty company between the two is. I mean, Ripple is a great example of how, and we can talk on this. Ripple's a great example of a company who has a lot of money, who has advocated a lot for finger quotes crypto, and it's gone awry. We've joked about them here on this podcast before, but like, not this may be calling back to the original title of this episode about too many lobbyists. Like, lobbyists are not just like lobbying for you. It can be a whole messy, often antagonistic stuff they lobby for. For example,
the Greenpeace Ripple co-branded campaign to change Bitcoin's code. So for those who don't know this, I think this dollar figure is correct. Ripple donated like 3 million, right, to Greenpeace, which like in the grand scheme of things is not that much money, but they donated, a few $1 million to Greenpeace to create this, really, you could call it an astroturfing campaign, because they like tried to make it seem like there was organic, interest behind this. for this campaign to, quote, change Bitcoin's code because of Bitcoin mining, saying it was polluting everything and it's dirty and it uses too much energy. And the idea here being that they wanted to basically kneecap Bitcoin's entire value proposition, i.e. proof of work, and lobby or push for a code change, I guess. I mean, the stated aims,
preposterous.
Yeah, it was really preposterous, especially like, if you're on that, this goes back to the information asymmetries we were talking about earlier, though, right? If you're on the outside looking in, you have no idea how Bitcoin consensus works. And if you don't know how it works, you should tune into the Op Next video feed that we have on YouTube. If you don't know anything about how Bitcoin consensus works, you think, oh, yeah, this is like, oh, I heard about Bitcoin's energy problem. Well, there's an easy fix. Just change the code.
Flip the switch, flip the switch, make it proof of stake.
Yeah, flip the switch and make it proof of stake. And then how do you explain to someone the game theory of a like contentious fork and, multiple listings on different exchanges for the forked coins and, running the code locally and choosing which chain that you side with? And then also, economic actors will decide maybe who has the longest chain because of economic forces in the financial markets. Like, none of this makes sense to a normal person. Hell, it makes barely sense to most Bitcoiners, honestly. And so it was never really totally clear how they were going to try to, promote this code change or push it through. But Ripple spent, $3 million with Greenpeace trying to create this kind of moral panic around Bitcoin's energy use for reasons that really are not totally clear to me.
No, and it doesn't stop there. Like Ripple from their accounts for amplifying this and also echoing these messaging. And it is very ironic because even today, the top spokespeople for Ripple will be in Washington, even as recent as I believe 2 weeks ago, said lines such as, "We are advocating for all cryptocurrencies." Bullshit. That's not true. It's very clear you're advocating specifically for crypto, which is because there are these like blockchain specific advocacy organizations like the recently created Solana Policy Institute. Now, I don't think the Solana Policy Institute has had much time to really like get off the ground and demonstrate what their goals or incentives are, but like you don't really see as much as the Ethereum Foundation, as it's the subject of speculation and conspiracy, maybe for good reason, from Bitcoiners. There's not as clear of a hostility towards Bitcoin. They are comparatively neutral and just focused on their chain, which
I get why people don't like the Ethereum Foundation and the Bitcoin camp. Obviously, the way that they've handled, I mean, Ethereum is a dumpster fire right now.
Fire.
And a lot of that has to deal with these like kind of overly engineered fixes that have been pushed through the Ethereum Foundation. But to your point, Charlie, Bitcoin and Ethereum have always had this like kind of hostile rivalry, almost in the same way that you would see it from like a college football team. Yeah. But there's never been a serious effort by the Ethereum Foundation to try to undermine Bitcoin from the inside or anything like that, right?
Yeah.
And obviously there have been people who said Bitcoin should do this from the Ethereum Foundation. They have tried to sell Ethereum as better Bitcoin. You can make a case that is trying to undermine it, but they have never done anything as openly hostile as Ripple. And just to kind of spend a minute on some invective for Ripple, the fact that this company still has any relevance when it is the most irrelevant, useless piece of garbage, perpetual, IPO crypto asset that, was like, by all definitions of security, but somehow has evaded being prosecuted is one. I think they paid some fines to the SEC. And the fact that their team are still actively attacking Bitcoin is just insane. It's like this like little man complex or something. It's like you had grand goals for what you're going to accomplish and you still can't do anything. Strangely enough, though, like I'm mystified by this. They still hold so much mindshare with passive investors in cryptocurrencies that see them as this kind of, banker's coin that's going to be used for bank settlements, which to me, it just shows either like an amazing level of marketing from their end or just like complete ignorance from the people who are investing in this stuff who aren't paying attention. But
and that goes back to what we were saying at the beginning. Like, you can have folks who are in the industry, because we live in the eternal September of customer and retail onboarding. You can resurrect the same narrative every few years and sell it to the same people. And Ripple is doing that. So if you're listening to this and you made it 45 minutes into this, and you think, oh, Brad Garlinghouse and the Ripple gang, they've got my best interest in mind. This company, the insiders of this company, have a giant treasury of XRP, and they're dumping on you, and they're using all that money to fund all this bullshit. And it's this objective information.
That is, and that beautifully stated, Charlie. And part of this bullshit, and we'll close with this perhaps, as part of the Greenpeace campaign, they had an artist commission this ghoulish, sepulchral sculpture of a skull with nuclear exhaust towers coming out of its head, and it's got Bitcoin for its pupils, and they're like, it's kind of a play on the laser eye thing. Actually,
it was meant as a astroturfing fear campaign, but they accidentally made the coolest marketing thing for Bitcoin.
Honestly,
of all time.
Yeah, they really did. And it's this kind of, if you're on audio and you're not, I recommend you Google this. Google Greenpeace Bitcoin skull. And it's this very ghastly but really badass looking sculpture of a skull with a bunch of wires pouring out of its jaw. And it's, like I said, it's got these smokestacks pouring smoke, which is actually also kind of funny, because if they are supposed to be silos from nuclear facilities, like, that's just steam.
Yeah, that's just steam.
It's just steam from it's a byproduct of the
cleanest energy per unit of kilowatt hour produced.
Yeah, exactly. And to your point too, Charlie, this is in the same way that pejoratives or slurs are often reappropriated by the offended party. That's what Bitcoin miners and Bitcoiners did with this. You would see Bitcoin miners use this as their profile picture on X and things like that. So, shout out to, I think Von Wong is the artist here. He made the skull of Satoshi. I'm sure he was happy to get a payday. I'm not really mad at him. I just think that this is hilarious that this did the exact opposite. It just actually made Bitcoin mining look kind of cool and metal, rather than this big scary thing that people don't understand.
So, to resolve, to tie this all back in, are there too many crypto lobbyists in Washington? And I do not think there are yet. There will be too many someday, but now we can enjoy an era of finally getting ours, and we can pay for the mistakes we make today somewhere down in the future. We'll issue a token to patch over those holes somewhere in the distant future.
Spoken like someone with a truly high time preference.
Exactly. Shorten your time preference, Colin, to 4 years. None of these decades and generational thinking. We're policy wonks.
We've got 4 years, and we're gonna milk it, baby.
And with that, thank you all so much for listening to Bitcoin Season 2. Oh yeah, Colin, you and I always have that one gag we do. What's the gag that we do at the end of each episode? Oh yes, that one where we... Boom, 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 boom.